Nobody talks about this, but one of the biggest mistakes Alpo Martinez ever made wasn't in Harlem. It happened in Washington, D.C. Before we begin, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. If you enjoy real stories about power, betrayal, and the dangerous politics of the underworld. When people talk about Alpo, they usually focus on Harlem, his rise with Rich Porter, the betrayal, the violence, and eventually the snitching. But there's another chapter in Alpo's life that doesn't get talked about enough, his time in D.C. And that chapter taught him a brutal lesson. In some cities, it doesn't matter how rich you are, how dangerous you are, or how famous you are. If you're an outsider, you still have to pay rent. When Alpo started doing business in D.C., many people gave him the same advice. Get connected with the Cobbs, specifically Cliff Cobb and Roy Cobb. Why? Because those were the men with real influence. If you wanted to move weight in Washington, D.C., aligning yourself with them made life easier. They could protect you, connect you, and make sure business ran smoothly. Alpo understood power. He knew relationships mattered, so he did exactly what smart businessmen do. He partnered up. His entry into D.C. came through supplying product at favorable prices. At first, everything looked good. Business was booming, money was flowing. But there was one problem: Roy Cobb. While Alpo had a decent relationship with Cliff, Roy was a completely different story. Roy did not like outsiders at all. He didn't believe in the idea that someone from out of town should come into D.C. and make millions without paying tribute. That wasn't his worldview. Roy was extremely territorial, geographical, protective. He treated D.C. like his kingdom. Even hustlers from nearby neighborhoods weren't automatically welcome. He wanted control over everything moving through his city. And if money was being made, he wanted a cut. Simple. That's what made Roy dangerous. Not just violence, structure. He had soldiers, loyal young hitters, men who moved exactly how he wanted them to move. If conflict came, he had numbers. That's power. An outsider like Alpo was tolerated only as long as Roy benefited. That's the key. As long as Roy was eating, things stayed peaceful. But once Roy felt shorted, problems began. At first, Alpo didn't fully understand the politics. He was flashy, very flashy. He pulled up in different luxury cars constantly. Every time someone saw him, he had something expensive. Nice cars, big spending, designer everything. He'd show love at clubs and restaurants, buy drinks for everybody, pay tabs, cover entire sections. To regular people, that looked impressive. To predators, that looked like opportunity. People started measuring him, watching him, calculating his worth. They knew one thing: Alpo had money, real money. And when people know you're holding serious money, expectations change. That's when Roy's behavior became more aggressive. See, once Roy did you a favor once, he expected ongoing favors. That was his mentality. Street economics can get complicated. Prices move like the stock market. Supply changes. Demand changes. Shortages happen. Today's price isn't always yesterday's price. But Roy didn't care. If he expected a certain number, that was the number he wanted. No excuses. The conflict escalated when Alpo gave Roy one price and Roy demanded another. Roy felt he deserved special pricing. Why? Because in his mind, he rolled out the red carpet. He allowed Alpo to eat in D.C. That meant something, at least to him. But Alpo didn't see it the same way. His strongest relationship was with Cliff, not Roy. And that difference in perspective created friction. Soon, another issue appeared. Roy started coming up short on payments, almost every time. And every time there was an excuse. But Alpo began realizing what was really happening. Roy wasn't accidentally short. He was taxing him, keeping whatever he wanted. That was his way of collecting rent. And while all of this was happening, Alpo's confidence kept growing. Why? Because he no longer depended solely on the Cobbs. He had built his own network. He had his own apartment, his own women, his own clients, his own connections. Most importantly, he had buyers spending serious money with him. People like Andre Johnson. Andre never complained about price, never argued, always had cash ready, and he was spending big, very big, bigger than the Cobbs. That changed everything. Now Alpo started thinking, do I even need them? That's dangerous thinking in a city like D.C., because D.C. politics weren't like Harlem. This wasn't just about product. This was about territory, respect, permission. Meanwhile, others in D.C. began educating Alpo about Roy's reputation. They told him the truth. Roy was a shakedown artist. Everybody knew it. Even major kingpins gave Roy product just to keep peace. That tells you everything. Then came a major turning point. Cliff Cobb got hit. Even though retaliation happened, the damage was bigger than physical. Alpo saw vulnerability. He realized the Cobb organization wasn't invincible. That changed how he calculated risk. He began thinking long term. What happens if one of these guys gets killed? What happens if they go to prison while owing me money? That's bad business. And Alpo, for all his flaws, thought like a businessman. Every major decision was about survival and profit. So he changed the rules. From that point on, he made his stance clear. If you want product, pay up front, or at least pay half. No more loose credit. No more endless excuses. His attitude became blunt. Take it or leave it. That didn't sit well with Roy's side. At all. Because from their perspective, the outsider was getting arrogant. Too comfortable. Too independent. Too bold. And that's when Alpo's world in D.C. started shrinking. It wasn't open warfare. Not yet. But danger was everywhere. If Roy's people caught him alone, there was a real chance he'd get snatched. And eventually, they made a move. At a car wash, things exploded. An attempt was made on Alpo. He got shot. That moment changed everything, because now the lesson became real. Pain makes lessons unforgettable. Alpo learned something the hard way. He had trusted someone who was playing both sides. That betrayal almost cost him his life. For the first time, he fully understood D.C. politics. These men weren't bluffing. This wasn't casual tension. This was life or death. Even people close to him told him something harsh. Charge those bullets to the game. Think about that. No revenge. No justice. Just accept it. Move smarter. That's cold. But that's the reality of certain street politics. Now here's where things get interesting. When people wanted revenge against others, Alpo could be ruthless. We saw that. But when it came to retaliation in D.C., it wasn't so simple, because you can't casually go after people like Roy Cobb or men connected to serious D.C. muscle. That's where Wayne Perry enters the picture. Wayne Perry had a terrifying reputation, one of the most feared enforcers in D.C. His name alone carried weight. Alpo eventually aligned himself with Wayne. Why? Protection. Simple. Because after getting shot, Alpo understood something critical. He wasn't safe. Not from Roy's people. Not from D.C. hitters. Not from anyone who felt he owed rent. Wayne helped keep serious predators off him. But that protection came with its own cost. Because protection is never free. And this leads to the biggest lesson in the story. Alpo eventually realized that if he wanted to stay in D.C., he had to pay somebody. Maybe Roy Cobb. Maybe Wayne Perry. But somebody. There was no such thing as operating independently forever. That was the illusion. And illusions get people killed. Looking back, you could argue that if Alpo understood this earlier, many things might have gone differently. Maybe fewer bodies. Maybe less chaos. Maybe fewer betrayals. Maybe less prison time. Maybe fewer lives destroyed. Who knows? But one truth remains. D.C. taught Alpo something Harlem never fully did. Every city has rules. Ignore them at your own risk. Some outsiders came into D.C. and survived. Others left in body bags. What separated the survivors from the dead? Understanding politics. Respecting power structures. Knowing who to pay. Knowing when ego becomes expensive. That's the hidden lesson here. Street life isn't always about who's toughest. Sometimes it's about who understands the chessboard. The smartest players know when to push and when to pay. Alpo was many things: ruthless, intelligent, dangerous, calculated. Was he a snitch? Yes. Was he weak? No. That's what makes him such a complicated figure. People like Alpo remind us that human beings are rarely simple. Strength and weakness can live in the same person. Bravery and fear, loyalty and betrayal, power and insecurity. That complexity is why his story still fascinates people decades later, because beneath all the violence lies something deeper: psychology, ego, power, and the deadly cost of misreading the game. In D.C., Alpo learned the truth the hard way. You can have money, you can have product, you can have killers around you, but if you don't respect the city's politics, none of that matters, because in certain places, nobody eats for free. But the deeper you study Alpo Martinez, the more you realize something important. His biggest strength was also one of his biggest weaknesses: confidence. Alpo believed in himself, and to be fair, he had reasons to. He came from Harlem, one of the toughest environments in New York. He built wealth, power, and reputation in a world where most people never make it out alive. He learned how to read people, move strategically, and stay several steps ahead. That kind of success changes how you think. When you keep winning, you start trusting your judgment more than everyone else's. You begin believing your instincts are always right. Sometimes that confidence becomes dangerous, because confidence can slowly turn into arrogance, and arrogance can blind even the smartest men. That's part of what happened in D.C. Alpo entered the city with money, product, and reputation. Those things gave him leverage, but they also gave him a false sense of security. He underestimated something critical: local politics. This is where many outsiders fail. They think money is enough. They think if they bring the best product, everyone will automatically respect them. But certain cities don't operate like that. Washington, D.C. had its own code, its own hierarchy, its own power structure. And if you ignored that structure, eventually someone would remind you. Violently. That's exactly what happened. The moment Alpo started believing he no longer needed the Cobbs, he unknowingly stepped into dangerous territory. From a business perspective, his logic made sense. Why keep dealing with people who constantly come up short on payments? Why tolerate being taxed if you have better buyers? Why keep feeding people who create more problems than profits? Those are reasonable business questions. But the streets don't always operate on logic. They operate on perception. Respect, pride, ego. Roy Cobb wasn't just looking at numbers. He was looking at status. From his perspective, this outsider had become too comfortable, too bold, too independent. And in street culture, independence can sometimes be seen as disrespect, especially when money is involved. That's something many people outside that world don't fully understand. Disrespect in the streets doesn't always come through words. Sometimes it comes through actions. Refusing to pay, changing terms, cutting someone out, moving like you no longer need them. Those actions speak loudly, sometimes louder than direct insults. And once Roy felt disrespected, the conflict became inevitable. That's when the game changed. No more friendly business, no more easy money. Now it became about making an example, because reputation is everything. If Roy allowed Alpo to openly challenge his authority without consequences, what message would that send? It would signal weakness, and weakness attracts predators. That's true in the streets. It's true in business. It's true in leadership. Power structures survive by controlling perception. That's why so many conflicts escalate even when money is small compared to the bigger picture. Often the fight isn't about money. It's about what the money represents. Respect, control, influence, authority. That's why the car wash shooting mattered so much. It wasn't just an attack. It was a message, a warning, a reminder. Nobody moves freely in this city without understanding who truly runs what. Getting shot forced Alpo to confront reality. Pain has a way of cutting through ego. Fast, after the shooting, he saw the board differently. He realized something uncomfortable. Being feared in Harlem didn't automatically make him feared in D.C. That's another major lesson. Success in one environment doesn't guarantee success in another. Different environments reward different behaviors. Different cities have different rules, different power structures. The people who survive long-term understand adaptation. They don't assume yesterday's formula works everywhere. They study, they adjust, they respect the terrain. That's what separates survivors from casualties. Alpo adapted, but only after paying a heavy price. And that price changed him. Because once someone survives an attempt on their life, paranoia increases. You start replaying everything. Who set me up? Who knew where I was? Who played both sides? Who smiled in my face while plotting behind my back? Those questions can consume a person. Trust becomes harder. Suspicion becomes constant, and suspicion changes behavior. Every meeting feels different. Every handshake feels questionable. Every alliance feels temporary. That's the hidden psychological cost of street life. People see the money, the jewelry, the cars. They rarely see the mental prison. Constant stress, constant vigilance, constant danger. No peace. And peace is priceless. That's something many people realize too late. You can have millions and still sleep with one eye open. You can have power and still live in fear. You can command respect and still trust nobody. That isn't freedom. That's another prison. That's why stories like Alpo's continue to fascinate people. They reveal something deeper than crime. They reveal human psychology, how ego shapes choices, how pride escalates conflict, how survival rewires the mind, and how power often comes with invisible chains. The street game rewards aggression, but it also punishes miscalculation. One bad read, one wrong alliance, one ego-driven decision. That's all it takes. Everything can collapse. And looking back at Alpo's DC run, one question stands out. What if he checked his ego earlier? What if he accepted the politics for what they were? What if he understood from day one that paying rent wasn't weakness but strategy? Would things have gone differently? Maybe. Maybe not. But one thing is certain. The streets always collect, one way or another. If they don't take money, they take blood. If they don't take blood, they take freedom. Eventually, everyone pays something. That's the hidden tax of the game, and that may be the biggest lesson in this entire story. Every environment has gatekeepers. Every system has power players. Whether you're talking about street politics, business, entertainment, or corporate America, the principle is often the same. Learn the power structure. Respect the landscape. Understand the unwritten rules, because ignoring them can become very expensive. Alpo learned this in the harshest way possible, and the irony is this. For someone so intelligent, so strategic, and so dangerous, his greatest challenge wasn't violence. It was ego management. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't outside. Sometimes it's inside. Pride, overconfidence, arrogance. Those traits have destroyed kings, CEOs, generals, and legends throughout history. Different worlds, same psychology. That's why this story still matters. Because it's bigger than crime. It's about human behavior. It's about understanding power. It's about knowing when to fight and when to adjust. And most importantly, it's about recognizing that every move has consequences. Even for legends. Even for killers. Even for kings. Because no matter how powerful you become, nobody is above the game. If this story hit different. Like this video and drop a comment below. I want to hear your thoughts. Did Alpo's ego cost him in DC? Or was conflict with Roy Cobb inevitable? Watch the video below for more true crime videos. Check out the merch in the description and support the channel.